Hi, this is Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. The first thing I've been thinking about is the Persian Gulf and security. The United States Fifth Fleet protects the Persian Gulf and the United States interests everywhere. For 60 minutes recently, that's 1 full hour, 11 Iranian naval small boats dangerously and provocatively danced around the United States Fifth Fleet, stationed in the Persian Gulf. That fleet, that United States presence, is not in those waters merely for show. They included in the fleet are a destroyer ship named the USS Paul Hamilton, the USS Lewis B. Puller, which is a naval landing base home to a team of Apache attack helicopters. The United States attempted to contact the 11 Iranian vessels using speakers, loud bursts emitted from warning sirens, all kinds of things. Finally, the Iranian boats responded and then left. Fars, which is an official Iranian media outlet, announced the incident, but without giving real details, creating the impression that they are fully in control of the waters. The United States Navy took a different tack. They issued a statement that they were in international waters, which they were. The naval statement read, and I'm quoting here, "The dangerous and provocative actions increased the risk of miscalculation and collision, and were not in accordance with the obligation under international law to act with due regard for the safety of other vessels in the area," unquote. Iran is pushing the envelope. Iran is trying to draw the United States into conflict. Iran is trying to mitigate the devastation called COVID-19 that has overtaken their leadership and country. They want to make themselves look strong, stronger than their arch nemesis, the United States. Trying to mitigate the situation even further, the Iranian leadership chose to switch gears and instructed Iranian media to announce that their Iranian Revolutionary Guards have successfully launched a satellite into orbit. United States President Donald Trump took umbrage to this whole situation. Having none of that, the president jumped right into it, and he did as he often does. He tweeted. In his tweet, President Trump explained that he gave a direct order to the United States Navy to shoot at Iranians if it were to happen again. The president's exact tweet was, and here I'm quoting again from the president, "I've instructed the United States Navy to shoot down and destroy any and all Iranian gunboats if they harass our ships at sea," unquote. Trump pushed back, ordering that these are not just warning shots, but orders to shoot down and destroy any and all. That's the quote, any and all. This is not an ambiguous command. It is a very clear and precise command. What is not clear, however, is how or if Iran will heed the message. This is not the first spat between Iran's Revolutionary Guards and the United States that take place in the Persian Gulf. We know that. President Donald Trump has mastered the art of hyperbole, exaggeration. And while the wording and the sentiment of his tweet and command is clear, the intent is not so clear. Was it hyperbolic, Trumpian response, or was it a direct threat to Iran to cease and desist, or else? One of Trump's greatest assets is that no one knows how to predict his actions. His tweets are often exaggerations, to be clarified later. But this was a direct threat, no question about it. The United States Fifth Fleet was in international waters, and was well within its rights to be there while the Iranian Revolutionary Guard boats were aggressively taunting them, trying to draw out a response. Persians, today's Iranians, have been playing the game of chess since the 6th century, and this is important to recognize. Many historians suggest that Persia actually invented the game of chess, originally a game played exclusively by royalty and nobility. The game eventually caught on for everyone. It has become a game of diplomacy for Iranian leadership. And this was a classic Iranian chess move, forced the United States to act by dangling an attractive but irrelevant pawn, i.e., their small naval boats, and then swoop in and change the makeup of the chessboard, moves and countermoves. The day after President Trump released his tweet, there was an official response from Iran. The head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Hossein Salami, not Soleimani, Sulami, was on national Iranian television saying, I'm quoting here again, "I have ordered our naval forces to destroy any American terrorist force in the Persian Gulf that threatens the security of Iran's military or non-military ships. Security of the Persian Gulf is part of Iran's strategic priorities, unquote. General Salami was indignant. He said that whatever happens in the Persian Gulf is under their purview. He said that control of the Gulf is in Iran's strategic interests and goals. Speaking on national television was significant. It demonstrates to the Iranian people that Iran is standing up to the United States. That was not covered in the Iranian press at all. However, the message was of President Trump, and his tweet later was not covered in any way, shape, or form. And this is important because that sort of put into context what Trump did. His second tweet. This tweet clarified an earlier aggressive Trump announcement about U.S. Navy protecting itself. Trump's message, his second message was, I have not changed the rules of engagement. That's a quote, unquote. I have not changed the rules of engagement, unquote. Context and clarity count. In other words, the tweet was an expression of standard U.S. policy merely expressed in Donald Trump's inimitable style. This is a game of high-stakes diplomatic chess. Unlike the simple board game of chess, the stakes in this game involve the safety of the world. Expect more moves and counter moves to come. Next thing I've been thinking about, and this is important, is Iran is a complex nation, run by complex leaders. In many ways, here's an example. Something else that's been on my mind. April 19th was the 82nd birthday of the Ayatollah Khamenei, not Khomeini, Khamenei. And it's important to recognize that although many official documents give his birthday as July 17th, not April 19th, the Ayatollah does not celebrate his birthday. He finds the entire discussion around birthdays to be a waste of time and a waste of money. When, in 2007, a large party was organized in honor of his birthday, the Ayatollah was not pleased. In fact, he was livid. It was billed as the party of all parties, the event of the year. Select Iranian officials were invited. People of rank and influence scurried for an invite. But when the news of the planned event reached him, the supreme leader put the kibosh on the festivity. He wrote a public statement and issued it to Iranian national news outlets, expressing his feelings. This is what he wrote. I'm quoting here. This is wrong. This birthday and similar events are not worth celebrating. The organizers of this event are responsible for having wasted time and public property. I'll never be thankful to the person celebrating my birthday and will only consider him responsible for this act of wasting, unquote. In this respect, the supreme leader is not alone. There are many people who, for any variety of reasons, shun birthdays and birthday celebrations. What makes this aversion to celebration noteworthy, however, is not the no party rule. What makes this non-celebration worth mentioning is the fact that we do not really know the true date of the Ayatollah Khamenei's birthday. Which date is correct? That's a big confusion. Now, that's important. The entire episode gives us an increased insight into Iran. The Ayatollah's website and the official website of his office list April 19th as his birthday. But the official website of the Islamic Republic lists July 17th as his birthday. If this discrepancy were only discovered now, we would label it fake news. Of course, we could always check Wikipedia because they know everything. Why the confusion? The insight we gain from this first and foremost is that Iran is secretive in a society, especially on issues of import and even on trivial issues like the birth date of its leader. That philosophy comes straight from the top. Next is that these details are not the least bit important to the leader of Iran, and he does not want them to be part of the culture of Iran or of import to the society he rules over. The Ayatollah is trying to teach his followers that birthday celebrations are meaningless. In the eyes of the Ayatollah, the waste is not just in time and money, but more importantly, in priorities. So, much more could have been done with the time that was wasted in preparation of a birthday bash. This year, I am certain that there is no celebration, none. Perhaps not even a mention of the significance of the day for him. This is a very difficult year for Iran, and the Ayatollah knows it. Coronavirus alone has beaten Iran very hard, taking not just average Iranians, many of the Ayatollah's inner circle and outer circle. The UN and US sanctions continue to hurt Iran and pound Iran. And worst of all, for Iran, the drop in oil prices. Oil has been Iran's only real resource and source of income. The exported they exported some oil illegally and some they exported legally, actually, which is important to recognize. They successfully figured out how to end around sanctions using tankers by turning off their GPS so that they could not be tracked, and then shipping oil out to India as well as to China, which goes the other way to the east. Now, the Ayatollah, and this is important, the Ayatollah Khamenei believes that the government he leads, is the best government for his people. The Ayatollah has chosen to repress these cravings using violence and prison as tools of intimidation. So far, his method has been successful, but he has to be asking himself how long it will continue to work. When the coronavirus first hit, the Ayatollah chose to ignore the pandemic, hoping it would go away. Then he blamed it on America. Of course, he could blame it all on America and on Israel. Anything so that his government would not be blamed. The fear was that if the government was blamed, the masses might rise up against the government and unseat the leadership. Only after it was unavoidable did the supreme leader set up and confront the situation. He changed tactics. Leadership stepped in. Social distancing was mandated. Mosques were closed. Public health policy was initiated. The Ayatollah has most certainly concluded that openness to the West in the form of those policies, behaviors, and attitudes of President Rouhani, his president, the man he selected for office, did not bring the results they promised. It is very likely that next year we will see a more conservative Iran. That means even more conservative than Iran is today. Iran will turn more insular and become more aggressive. Iranian leadership will try hard to antagonize their enemies, especially the United States, and will try to find trusted allies who will help them both by attacking the United States and funneling them trade and resources in exchange for oil. The big question mark will still remain. The date of the birth might be in question, but not the year. Any way you look at it, the supreme leader of Iran is in his 80s. How long will he be capable of maintaining his rule? If he has chosen a successor, he has kept that decision secret as well. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column by Alex Fishman, and is from Ynet. It was published on May 8th, 2020, and is entitled Israel's Fight with Iran Knows No Coronavirus Crisis. The main thesis Fishman develops is that despite the ravages of coronavirus in Syria and Iran, Iran is still hard at work in Syria, and Israel needs to continue to apply pressure to force Iran out. This is how Fishman begins. The series of attacks in Syria attributed to Israel during April seems like a planned policy and is no longer merely a presumed response to Iranian initiatives. It seems that it was a planned action most likely meant to root out any Iranian weeds trying to entrench themselves on Syrian soil via the development of pro-Iranian militias on the Golan, resuming Hezbollah operations on the plateau, reinforcing its headquarters and munitions warehouses. Fishman now explains that Israel has a plan which is far more detailed than a few bombings on a few sites. He writes, but since the war Israel is conducting all across the Middle East is far more intricate than mere aerial bombardments, it makes sense the scope of its activities, including reports of mysterious explosions, is apparently far more intense than has been reported by the foreign media. Fishman shows that Iran's agenda is to resume a very active role in Syria. Fishman writes, Iranians are also trying to return to the pre-coronavirus routine in Syria. If at the end of March, the Revolutionary Guard transport jets were flying medical equipment from China to Tehran, in early April, those same aircraft started landing in Damascus as well, carrying military equipment in their cargo holds. As Fishman begins to conclude his material, he explains that the plan by Israel has also been approved and coordinated with the United States. He writes this: it is safe to assume that there is coordination or understanding between Israel and the United States regarding the pressure on Iran. Past experience shows that as tensions rise in the Gulf, so do the tensions between Israel and Iran on the Syrian front. To end, Fishman emphasizes that Israel's policy has risks, and the strategy may cause a counter-response by Iran, but that will give Israel even more justification to act and defend itself. Fishman writes in his conclusion, the circumstances present Israel with the opportunity to weaken Iran's foothold in Syria. This is a strategic opportunity for, even if Iran doesn't seek to respond, it will only create grounds for Israel to conduct a decisive military operation against it across the northern border. Next up is a column by Jan Shore. It was published in the Times of Israel, May 11th, 2020. The column explains that Bibi Netanyahu might not be the perfect person, but he's very good at protecting Israel. The author writes that British Jews should look at that and hold back their critique of his character flaws. The column is entitled Why British Jews Should Lay Off Bibi Even If We Disapprove of Him. Picking up her column right as she begins the central question, which I think it's important to understand. And that central question is the conversation about public critique of Israel. She writes, many comments described Bibi in uncomplimentary, sometimes colorful language, but most expressed a variant on how dare anyone suggest British Jews should not be critical, unquote. Now, Jan Shore gives you her point of view and personal attitude about Bibi. Jan Shore writes, let me state here that I am emphatically not a fan of Bibi Netanyahu, not of his politics, his policies, his personal life, nor of his life choices. But I do see the very complex scheme of fragile threads that crisscross the region, and I'm aware it would not take much for the Middle East to explode again. I also understand why official reprimands from British Jews, or indeed criticism from any diaspora community, are unhelpful and not only undermine Bibi, but undermine Israel. For me, undermining Bibi would be no bad thing if it dislodged him from office. But as most of the criticism comes from people who, like me, have no vote, it fails in that regard. She explains that attacking Bibi is an attack on Israel, and she writes it very clearly. Instead, undermining Bibi merely serves to undermine Israel because all that effort, overt hostility, and condemnation provides extra leverage for those who demonize Israel and deny Israel's legitimacy. In other words, in a similar way to how anti-Zionism in the UK segued into anti-Semitism, so anti-Bibiism easily segues into anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiment. Or, if it doesn't actually segue into it, it definitely helps to feed it. Short concludes with a metaphor about a hated and simply not nice surgeon. But the surgeon is undoubtedly the best in the world. Despite personality flaws, that's the surgeon you want. She concludes by writing that metaphor. There's a brain surgeon, let's call him Benjamin, who is brilliant but deeply flawed. He swindles cash from healthcare providers, cheats on his wife, he has a gambling habit, and his children are a combo of all the brats from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But his brain surgery is second to none. It is the envy of colleagues and makes the hospital a center of excellence. Let us now imagine that this brilliant, deeply flawed surgeon is performing a delicate, life-saving surgery on your 4-year-old child. Would you gather his colleagues and stand outside the operating theater screaming insults at him? That's how she ends. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you a headline and 2 cartoons today, all from Powerline Blog. Now, I'm relying on Powerline Blog quite a bit, and they cull material from a great many sources, and they are sent some spectacular items. Powerline Blog is the greatest collection of humor and commentary that I have seen on the internet. They usually publish it weekly, but nothing is usual today, And so now they post a midweek collection also. It's in the midst of their larger postings. We are all aware of the acute medical crisis that took over the world. All non-essential surgeries were canceled. We all know that. The reasons are obvious. Most importantly, hospitals needed the space, the resources, the doctors. And second is the fear that non-COVID-19 patients would become infected. Why risk it? That's not the headline. The headline caption reads, and this is unbelievable, Beverly Hills City Council votes to allow plastic surgeries amid coronavirus concerns. In Beverly Hills, plastics has been deemed essential surgery. Next up is a cartoon. On May 9th, Powerline Blog published this cartoon. The cartoon is a play on social distancing. This is similar to something we saw last week about jousting. Like all good humor, genre is emerging here and might be more and more. That is, what is the best sport for social distancing? In this case, two people are fencing. The caption reads, Fencing, the perfect COVID-19 sport. It gives three reasons. Three, one, masks, two, gloves, and three, if anyone gets closer than 6 feet to you, you stab them. That's funny. Last up is a theatrical poster, one of the famous playwright Samuel Beckett, and it was from May 5th, 2020. The poster is from Waiting for Godot. Now, in this particular poster, Godot was scratched out. The poster now reads Samuel Beckett, waiting for the second wave, because they scratched out Godot. You see the picture, the image. It's very, very funny. Why is it so funny? Because that's what we're all waiting for, the second shoe to drop. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. 3 Arab Gulf states have asked Israel's Sheba Hospital for help in treating COVID-19. Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and probably Kuwait have reached out to Israel and the Israeli hospital in Ramat Gan called Sheba. It's important to understand that the contact was made directly to the hospital, not through political agents. Actually, it was made through an American rabbi, but that's a different story at the time. It seems that members of the royal families and their emissaries traveled to Israel to visit the hospital in March. Apparently, they liked what they saw. There is no doubt that other hospitals around Israel have been approached by countries in need of assistance. Over time, information about all these contacts will come to light. The world is watching Israel. Even traditional enemies of Israel are watching how Israel confronts COVID. They're asking for help and learning from Israel. Finally, a positive thing comes out of COVID-19. Now, next up is an idea that via conference call, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had a conversation with 7 other world leaders about COVID-19. Netanyahu explained how Israel has, thus far, been successful in attacking the virus. What is not clear is what will happen as Israel partially reopens and returns to normal. Netanyahu spoke to his colleagues about returning to a safe routine in the shadow of the virus. The readying for a potential second outbreak was also on the agenda. In a statement from the Prime Minister's office describing the call, Netanyahu was quoted as saying, quote, In fact, no one knows what will happen. When we open our economies and schools, we must be ready and prepared for an accordion effect and the possibility that we will need to close again. Once again, the world is watching Israel very closely. The Middle East has been devastated by COVID-19, except for Jordan. Jordan, a country of 10 million people, has less than 500 people testing positive for COVID-19 and has now lifted all restrictions from the coronavirus. Israel, which has a population of 9.5 million, almost the same size, has had 250 deaths and about 15,000 cases infected with COVID-19. Yes, Jordan closed itself to high-risk countries like China immediately. Yes, Jordan shut down all travel immediately. In fact, travel with vehicles was completely banned. 1,000 cars were impounded for traveling inappropriately. 2,000 people were arrested for driving. Yes, 5,800 people who arrived by air were quarantined in the hotels down at the Dead Sea. People were permitted to walk and buy food and necessities, but only by foot. The shutdown in Jordan started on March 18th. Whatever they did until now, Jordanians have been successful in stopping the coronavirus. Behind the scenes, there are worse than one things in Syria. Rami Makhlouf is Syria's richest man and the cousin of the president, Bashar Assad. But over the past week and month, Makhlouf has taped and posted two scathing attacks against his cousin on Facebook. Makhlouf is claiming that the Syrian regime is arresting his employees and stifling his business. He asserts that Assad wants to nationalize his business. That would be a rather hefty move for Assad and Syria. Makhlouf owns 60% of Syria's production and businesses. He has amassed a net worth of $10 billion or more. Makhlouf and Assad are more than cousins. They are friends, or they were at least friends. Makhlouf has backed and bankrolled Bashar Assad personally since the first day in office, and he's contributed billions of dollars to support Assad in the fight against the rebels trying to oust him. So why the split? Why the dramatic change? It all goes back to Russia. Russia suggested that Assad tax his cousin Makhlouf. So Makhlouf responded that it was excessive, and he rejected the tax assessment. So Assad marched in and started arresting his workers. Iran has changed its currency recently from the rial to the toman. Effectively, it means that 4 zeros have been lopped off the existing currency. One toman is worth 10,000 rials. The change in currency happens when a simple revaluation is not enough. In this case, the United States and United Nations sanctions have crippled the Iranian economy. Add to that the coronavirus and the impact it's had on both the country and the economy of Iran, and one can understand why Iran is acting so drastically. The toman was an official Iranian currency in the 1890s, a Persian currency, we should say. Over the years, the rial became the currency, and the toman remained a denomination within the rial currency. It was the denomination one level higher than the rial. Consider this another indication of Iran collapsing under pressure. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that humor is a very important tool in times of crisis? Jews have been the foundation on the rise of the art of humor and using humor to offer critique and even insight into politics and crisis. Their humor is even given as advice to leaders. The Bible and rabbinic writings are filled with humor and irony. Some of its most funny parts are hilariously funny and filled with that irony. One of the greatest pieces of this humor in the Bible and the rabbis is the story of Elijah, Eliyahu, and his battle with the prophets of Baal near Haifa in 1 Kings, chapter 18, line 27. Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to whose God is greater, Baal or God, the God of Israel. And he tells the prophets of Baal to go first. They were supposed to have their God consume the sacrifice on the altar. Nothing happens. The prophets scream, they cut themselves. Elijah offers some good advice, mocking them. Shout louder, he says. After all, he's a God. He might be talking to someone. He might be detained. I'm quoting here, actually, right from the Bible. He might be going somewhere. He might be asleep. Rashi, the medieval French commentator, actually explains the words going somewhere. Rashi writes, that means going to the bathroom. Now that's funny. It's Jewish humor, and it's a serious critique. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud next week, again on JBS.